Resuming debate. Senator Plett.
For now, yeah. Here we go.
Did you recognize? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Leader. Colleagues, it is with a mix of sadness and hope that I rise today to speak on the Trudeau government motion 165 to change the rules of the Senate. I am sad because I think some of the changes brought forward by this motion are detrimental to the Senate and the Canadian democratic system. And I am sad because the precedent created by Senator Gold with his motion marks the end of a Senate that was functioning in some ways outside of partisanship. And now we see in the House that we now see in the House, and I will elaborate on this in a moment. As I said, I'm also hopeful because I think this is the last act in this lousy drama of Justin Trudeau's attempt to reform the Senate. And let's be clear, this is Justin Trudeau's attempt. The end is near for this government, and Pierre Poilievre will soon be given the mandate to repair this broken country. And one of the things Justin Trudeau broke and that Pierre Poilievre will have to repair is the Senate of Canada. Contrary to what Senator Gold and the Liberals would like us to believe, Justin Trudeau did not come up in 2014 with an elaborate plan to throw the Canadian Senate into the 21st century. His plan was done on a napkin out of political expediency and under pressure to come up with a gambit that would protect him from going down with half of his caucus. The vast majority of you were not here in 2013 when the Senate had to deal with some senators having dubious expenses. But let me briefly explain to you what happened. And for those senators who were here, this will help refresh your memory. 4 senators were named in the media for having questionable expenses. One of them was a Liberal who quickly decided to retire. When the Conservative government decided to act and suspend the 3 other senators, Justin Trudeau instructed his Liberal senators to abstain on that vote. Half of the caucus did not follow his orders. Trudeau was furious. He sent Dominic LeBlanc, his trusted henchman, to organize a coup in the Senate Liberal caucus. George Fury was to replace Jim Cowan as leader. That failed. That made Trudeau even more angry. And he knew that the Auditor General inquiry would show more of his Liberal senators having questionable expenses. So he decided to throw them out of caucus, to send them into exile. That was done unceremoniously. Senators Jaffer, Cordy, Ringette, Down, or Massicott could all tell you more about this meeting on a cold Wednesday morning in January of 2014, when Liberal senators learned who the real Justin Trudeau is. Those senators who had worked tirelessly for the Liberal Party were discarded like nothings, thrown by the wayside by Justin Trudeau on his way to power.
Leader of the third party.
And it was after they decided to throw out their senators from caucus that the Liberals came up with a plan to change the Senate without really changing it. The idea that being part of a national caucus made the Liberal senators less independent is a sham. The Liberal senators that were here when I came, such as the ones I've already mentioned, and then further Cowan, Joyelle, Baker, Fraser, all of them were strong and independent thinkers. In fact, as I just said, it is because they did not follow Justin Trudeau and because they were independent thinkers that they were tossed aside. There were two objectives to the plan that Trudeau concocted in 2014. One, they had to cut the tie with those senators who could become an embarrassment at any time. The Liberals saw their Senate colleagues as toxic time bombs that they had to run away from. For Trudeau, his image was sacrosanct. It was out of the question that any senator, as good and loyal as they may be, would stain his reputation. Secondly, the Liberals, being in third place, had to put something in the window as far as Senate reform was concerned. The Harper plan to have term limits in Senate elections was still out there, although it was being restrained by the courts. And the second place NDP plan was simpler, just abolish the institution. So to distinguish themselves, the Liberals came up with this idea of a committee of Liberals. Now remember, a committee of Liberals that would appoint Liberals in the Senate who would then call themselves independent. The Liberals would also ask the leader of the government to style himself as a representative, even if he was the leader of the government. You have to admire the Liberals for this. They were able to sell immobility as progress. Senate reform was suddenly simple. All you have to do is change titles. Call a leader a representative, a whip a liaison, and a Liberal an independent, and ta-dam, you have a new Senate. Colleagues, fast forward to 2024. Sensing that Trudeau's time is up, the government has decided to rush in this motion to change the rule. In their 9th year in power, the Liberals have decided to prepare their exit and change the Senate for good, or so they hope. And that's a wooden one. What took them so long? I know that Senator Gold will accuse the Conservatives of having stalled all those magnificent changes Justin Trudeau was supposed to bring to this place. Sorry, colleagues, that's the wrong answer. The problem was what I outlined. These changes were not well thought out. They were just a couple of slogans for the 2015 election that Trudeau was never supposed to win. The government had no clue what to do with the Senate. It took them 5 months to decide that they needed a leader in the Senate. Yes, Senators, the Senate sat for 5 months without the government being represented. The new senators, the Liberals appointed in 2016, had no idea what to do, sit all by themselves or create groups. But then, how can you be in a group and be an independent? Somebody found a way. We saw the birth of strange notions like leaders who don't lead, liaisons who liaise with who knows who, and facilitators who facilitate who knows what. Of course, all of this is just a masquerade. Colleagues, calling your cat a feline does not make you a lion tamer. Meanwhile, Conservative and Liberal senators all patiently waited for the government and the new senators to come up with their plans. To no one's surprise, the independent senators decided to replicate the model that exists in all Westminster parliaments and formed groups. Sir John A. Macdonald's prediction that this place could not function with 105 loose fish came true once again. The majority of senators, still affiliated to a political party, agreed to the demands of these new senators and made the necessary changes to the rules without any resistance, I might add. As Senator Gold pointed out in his speech, and I quote, "The rules of the Senate were adjusted to allow for the participation of these groups, or sessional orders were put in place so that new senators could be included." Listening to Senator Gold, you would think that the Trudeau senators had to fight with Conservatives and Liberals for every inch. Nothing, colleagues, is further from the truth. The Conservative opposition has not resisted the vast majority of the changes to the rules to the Parliament of Canada Act or the way we conduct our business. We know that elections have consequences. We know that by appointing 81 senators, as many as Wilfrid Laurier did, Justin Trudeau has put his mark on the Senate. But we have been very clear, we will not accept the reduction of powers of the opposition. And we will not accept changes that will restrict a new Conservative government that will very shortly be in place to be able to properly conduct its business in the Senate. That has been and remains our red line. Now, again, I will come back later to the impact of the changes pushed by Senator Gold on the opposition and a future Conservative government. But first, I want to address what I think is the most egregious aspect of this move from the government. To use a government motion to change the rules without any agreement or even meaningful discussions with opposition is, as far as I know, unprecedented. When I asked Senator Gold about this, he could not point to one previous incident where the government had moved unilaterally to change the rules of the Senate. And please, Senator Gold, spare us with your argument that you tabling a motion is not a unilateral move by the government. Justin Trudeau has appointed 81 senators. There are only 13 senators in the opposition out of 96. Yes, using the powers of the government to ram such a motion down the throat of the opposition is unprecedented, and I would suggest undemocratic, especially when it is done under the threat of imminent closure, a motion that we now have hanging over our heads and have already been threatened with. Senators will know that the regular process to changing the rules in the Senate is to go through a study, then a report from the Rules Committee, where consensus has always been the policy. It has always been accepted that to change the rules of the game, you need to discuss with all players and have their input and have a consensus.
Call Parliament.
Right. No more so. Senator Gold will go down in history as the leader of the government who broke this model that has been in effect since 1867. He is the first to do what is now routinely done in the House of Commons, use the government majority to change the rules. You will note the cynicism of the government here. They are using the most partisan tactic ever used to change the rules to make this place less partisan, or so they pretend. Senator Gold has opened a Pandora's box. A page has been turned. I will make a prediction now that the genie is out of the bottle. Future government leaders will use this precedent to justify the use of government powers to change the rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a few years, when the Conservatives regain the majority in the Senate, they will be able to change the rules as they see fit. More or less, 50% of all of you and me, 50% I guess will not be around. So 50% will not be, 50% will still be around. For those of you who will sit in the opposition benches, I think you will look back to our current debate and say, Plett warned us. Trust me, the Conservative government will do what you are ahead of time telling them that they can do. Frankly, I do not understand why the government did not use the method in place since Confederation to change the rule. What was good under Wilfrid Laurier, under Lester B. Pearson, and under Brian Mulroney is no longer useful under Justin Trudeau. The Conservative opposition has 4 seats out of 15 on the Rules Committee. 4 out of 15. The 4 other groups who support the government's general policies, including the budget, share 11 seats. Why does the government need to use a government motion to ram these changes through the Senate? Why did Senator Gold not first table his changes in the Rules Committee? Maybe he didn't trust or doesn't trust his 11 allies on the Rules Committee. I don't know. In any event, this is a slap in the face to the Rules Committee and its chair, and I hope his chair takes note. By moving a motion, the government is skipping the committee process. So we will not hear expert witnesses who could tell us what they think about these changes. We will not be able to debate each change, to carefully review the text, to wordsmith each and every new rule. What the Senate is so proud of, and for so many years has been known for, is its committee work, its ability to do a deep dive. The government has decided that we don't need that for our very own rules.
They know better.
That is why the government is using a government motion, so that senators cannot hear experts who would be against the proposal, cannot carefully study the changes and tweak them if necessary. The government, as Senator Housakis just pointed out, knows better. It has all the answers already. Who cares what other senators think? It is true that some of the ideas we find in the motion have already been discussed, and there was consensus on several of the notions. But the government senators presented this as a take-all-or-nothing package.
They don't want consensus.
Senator Quinn asked today, would Senator Gold consider one simple amendment? He refused to answer. It's his motion. He didn't ask what the rest of the Senate would do. He asked Senator Gold, would you be prepared to accept a simple amendment? And Senator Gold just refused to answer the question.
Yes, that's the government. He's not sure.
It is true that some of the ideas we find, like I said, they have already been discussed. But government senators presented this as a take-all-or-nothing package. This is when Senator Belmar and the Rules Committee decided not to present a report. It was their decision, not the Conservatives. So, the government has decided to act unilaterally. In frustration, as Senator Gold admitted in his speech, instead of doing his job as a consensus builder, which he should be, he is throwing Senator Belmar under the bus and bullying the opposition. Let's not kid ourselves here. These changes are a fait accompli. Senator Gold admitted in his speech that there was no place for discussion. Justin Trudeau wants those changes, and what Justin Trudeau wants, his senators have to deliver. The objective of this notion is to create a second government caucus or a second opposition caucus, depending on who is in power. And Senator Gold admitted this part of the DNA of this motion. Then, what is left to negotiate for the Conservatives if turning the Senate into a Liberal echo chamber is the ultimate objective, and the government will use any means to do it, including closure of debate? Now that the Liberal Party is down by 20 points in the polls, and now that the Trudeau senators are looking at the prospect of sitting in opposition for a very long time, they are changing the rules. And they will use time allocation to make sure that the debate is cut short. After all, we need to act fast and get rid of these time-wasting procedures. Time-wasting procedures is what Senator Lankin called this. Lastly, on this topic of the unprecedented use of a government motion to change the rules, I'm not sure what to make of the waffling by Senator Gold on whose idea these changes actually are. He was asked. He would not answer. if the Prime Minister supports these changes. He said in his speech, and I quote, "This is an initiative of the government representative office in the Senate. It is not an initiative of the Prime Minister's office, period." Senator Gould's words. Senator Gould's words. Well then, what is government business in the rules of the Senate? We have to ask us this question. It is not a personal idea from a member of the government. It is not an initiative from an office somewhere in this building. It is the business of the government. If Senator Gould wants us to believe that this motion is not a motion from Justin Trudeau, the Liberal government, then he should not use a government motion to advance it.
Exactly.
I will trust that Senator Gould is not trying to pull a fast one on all of us, and that he is not using the tools of the government to advance his own personal agenda. We should stop fooling around. This government motion is 100% supported by the government, by Justin Trudeau, the Liberals, and probably Jagmeet Singh.
He wants to abolish the Senate.
The Liberal Party and its supporters here and in the House will have to pay a political price now and in the future for these changes and the way they are being pushed. The second thing that I have an issue with is the timing of this motion. As I said, there is a smell of desperation in Senator Gould's move. The Trudeau government has had a majority in the Senate for 7 years or so. All those years, even before it had a majority, the government was able to pass its legislation. In fact, thanks to the fact that he had 23 open seats to fill when he was elected, Justin Trudeau was able to get a majority in the Senate very quickly. When you compare him with Laurier, Borden, or Mulroney, who had to fight for years against a Senate majority from the opposite side, Justin Trudeau is lucky. So why are these changes so urgent? We all know the answer. Changing the rules of the Senate has become urgent since Pierre Poilievre has opened a 20-point lead in the polls. Senator Gould is now desperate to entrench before the election this ridiculous structure that Justin Trudeau has created in the Senate because he knows the Liberals will be wiped out, likely back to third-party status again. As I will explain later, this motion puts the ISG or its successor in the position to be on the ballot in the Senate, throwing its weight on whatever side the Liberals will be. Now in power, tomorrow in opposition. This way, the Liberals are making sure that for a few years at least, the Senate will tilt in its favor, in their favor. They say they want to get rid of the duopoly in the Senate. They are replacing it with a triumvirate where they control 2 of the 3 actors. Let's talk about the role of the opposition. Let me turn to an important consideration in this debate. It is clear that some of the Trudeau senators have a problem with having a robust opposition in the Senate. We use words like liar, incompetent, or corrupt to truthfully describe their favorite Prime Minister. We use procedural tactics. We are wasting time. We ask too many questions. Some of these questions touch topics that they are very uncomfortable with. This shows not only a poor understanding of the democratic process by these senators, but also a lack of knowledge about the history of the Senate. You don't have to go back far in history to find oppositions in the Senate which were way more obstructionist than we have ever been in the last 9 years. So, colleagues, sorry to cause all that pearl clutching, but we are simply doing our job, and we play a role as important as the role of the government and its supporters play. And I will repeat it over and over. The Senate needs an organized opposition that has the necessary tools to do its job. Let me quote from former Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier. It is indeed essential for the country that shades of opinion which are represented on both sides of this House should be placed as far as possible on a footing of equality, and that we should have a strong opposition to voice the views of those who do not think with the majority. You will note that Prime Minister Laurier insisted on the fact that government and opposition should be as equal as possible. And what is the role of the opposition? Of course, it is to keep the government's proverbial feet to the fire, to challenge the government on behalf of Canadians. Let me again quote a former Prime Minister, this time John G. Diefenbaker. If Parliament is to be preserved as a living institution, His Majesty's loyal opposition must fiercely perform its functions. When it properly discharges them, the preservation of our freedoms is assured. The reading of history proves that freedom always dies when criticism ends. It upholds and maintains the rights of minorities against majorities. It must be vigilant against oppression and unjust invasions by the cabinet of the rights of the people. It should supervise all expenditures and prevent over-expenditure by exposing to the light of public opinion wasteful expenditures or worse. It finds fault. It suggests amendments. It asks questions and elicits information. It arouses, educates, and molds public opinion by voice and vote. It must scrutinize every action by the government, and doing so prevents the shortcuts through democratic procedure that governments like to make. Of course, when doing its job, the opposition will ruffle feathers of those in government. This is at the heart of the democratic process. One may feel that the opposition is going too far, that it uses sharp language, that it is wasting time. Well, there are rules to stop that if that is the case. So as long as the opposition is following the rules, the government and its supporters should, and indeed have to, accept the fact that this is part of our democratic process. Let me quote a third Prime Minister, Lester B. Pearson. In national politics, during the years when I was in the government, I watched the opposition perform its duty vigorously and industriously with courage and determination. They rightly insisted on their right to oppose, attack, and criticize, to engage in that cut and thrust of debate, so often and so strongly recommended by those concerned with the vigor and health of Parliament and the health of democracy. I cannot forbear to add, however, that the application of this procedure has in the past been occasionally resented by those who are cut and thrust at. As for the accusation that the opposition is wasting time, slowing things up, I will admit it is true. Not only is it part of the arsenal of the opposition, it is the most effective tool that we have. When introducing a measure in the Senate, the government has only one objective, and that is to get it out of here as fast as possible. That's even before it's introduced in the Senate. It's already got Senator Gould's objective. This has, for Senator Gould, become an obsession. That is why we are rushed to pass bills and then stay in the House, that then stay in the House for months, if not years. But time is important for the opposition. It allows to keep the debate in the public eye. It allows it to alert stakeholders. It allows it to show that there could be a better way to do things, to present itself as a government in waiting. This does not mean that the opposition must drag its feet and turn the chamber into a battlefield on all questions. The opposition must be careful in using its procedural tools. It must maintain a balance between compromise and obstruction, co-option and reflex opposition. But the opposition has the right, as it should, to use all necessary means within the bounds of the rules to stop what it considers measures detrimental to Canada. And in the end, the government, especially when it has a majority like in the current Senate, will be able to go forward. As the saying goes, the opposition has its day, the government has its way. Senators should know that since 2015, even before there was a leader of the government in the Senate, the Conservative opposition has been able to negotiate reasonable timetables on moving government legislation. We understand very well our role in Parliament. And when Senator Gold accuses us of stalling, delaying, or filibustering legislation, he is recycling for the Senate talking points that the Prime Minister's office prepared for his House colleagues. If some senators are interested in learning what an obstructionist opposition is, they can look at Hansard from where the Conservatives, when the Conservatives were in government and the Liberals had a majority in the Senate. Debate on the GST comes to mind. I cannot fail to note that when the government and its senators say they want to make the Senate more efficient, they are not talking about running the place better at a lesser cost. When they say that, what they are looking for is to cut the opposition's ability to use time. They want to cut debate. Stop the time wasting, as Senator Lankin said. But efficiency is not what the government is looking for. It is expediency. The government, any government in fact, wants to move fast. It wants to get to business. But rushing legislation is not what the Senate is for. As author Gerald Schmidt said, Parliament exists not only to transact the business of the state, but to provide a forum in which all legitimate points of view can be expressed. The government has a right and duty to govern. The opposition's right and duty, if it believes the public interest is at stake, is to oppose the government's policies and actions by every legitimate parliamentary means. I invite senators who have trouble with Conservative opposition in the Senate to consider the alternative. The point of view of close to 80% of Canadians who do not support the Trudeau Liberals is not expressed here. Then what is the point of the Senate? This 80% will ask the question, why are we paying $130 million a year for an institution that simply parrots the Trudeau government lines? Why not just abolish it? I have no argument against that. Sometimes I wonder if it wasn't Justin Trudeau's secret plan to get rid of the Senate, make it so irrelevant that abolishing it will just be a cost-saving measure that barely anyone would notice. For now, at least, you can count on the Conservative senators to spice up debate, but imagine what it would be to only have Trudeau supporters here, debating how great his policies are. That $130 million price tag would look horrific, wouldn't it? Finally, I want to point out an additional fact about the opposition in the Senate. The opposition caucus must have ties to a political party, just like the government caucus needs to have ties to the party in power. These ties can be loose. They can just be the membership of senators to a party, like the Liberals had in 2014-15, but there must be ties for two reasons. First, to call yourself the opposition of the government, you must not only oppose it from time to time on specific issues, you must also want to take the place of the government. Every day, the opposition is trying to convince the electorate that it should change places with the government. This is the role that is fundamental in our system. As the distinguished Canadian parliamentary Stanley Knowles put it, the opposition should so conduct itself in Parliament as to persuade the people of the country that it could be an improvement on the government of the day. Only a group tied to a party that wants to replace the government can play the role of the opposition in the Senate. That is why our rules are written this way. Having ties to a political party also gives the government and the opposition additional legitimacy, as Senator Gold himself said in his speech. The point that the opposition is trying to make is one worth taking seriously, he said. If one purports to speak for the government, there should be a link to the government, because I represent a government that was elected and represents. The Conservative senators stand up and say, we speak for 6 million, whatever the number of Canadians who voted for them was. And they are right to say that, because there is a link there. When they say, I speak for Canadians, they represent a party that does. This is another reason why putting the ISG on the same footing as the opposition, now the Conservatives, tomorrow the Liberals or the NDP, is wrong. Let me go back to the motion in front of us. It contains 3 types of changes to the rules. The first type of changes to the rules is the introduction of all those new and phony terms that the government is so enamored with. My reaction to those changes is why? If Senator Gold wants to style himself as a representative, special agent, enforcer, negotiator, beggar-in-chief, or grand poobah, that is his privilege.
Lord of the Senate.
He is and will remain the leader of the government in the Senate, period.
By law.
By law.
By the Constitution.
No matter how he is dressed, combed, or styled. To change the rules to satisfy this strange need to come up with a new vocabulary to describe the same reality is frankly ridiculous. Secondly, there are changes to some specific provisions, such as the evening suspension or order paper questions. Although I don't support those changes, I acknowledge that they may have some merits. They are certainly worth being looked at carefully and debated. I regret that the government has refused to give the opportunity to the Rules Committee to look at these changes, and especially that we will not be able to reflect on the unintended consequences. In fact, I almost fell off my chair when I saw that the Rules Committee has a meeting scheduled for May 7th to study, guess what? Delayed answers and responses to written questions. Mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. I'm not sure what to make of this. Are we having 2 competing debates? In any event, I believe it shows that Senator Gold is clearly rushing things, and somebody doesn't know what they're doing.
Well, that's just...
Finally, the government has decided to put the ISG on the same level as the government and the opposition, and to give the CSG and the PSG some symbolic powers. And somehow they're falling all over themselves wanting to vote for this too, at least their leaders are, when they get nothing. Senator Gold said in his speech, and I quote, "This is the centerpiece of this initiative. Its DNA. It is like the object of a bill. Certain things cannot be given up. If I can use the analogy without destroying the bill, it would be out of order in that situation were this a piece of legislation." This is where I have a big problem with this motion. By putting the ISG on the same footing as the government and opposition, this motion creates an imbalance in the Senate. Remember, the Westminster model is based on the fact that there is a balance between the rights and privileges of the government and the rights and privileges of the opposition. So first, by giving some of the privilege of the opposition to other groups, the motion dilutes the powers of the opposition. A right that is held by a few is a privilege. A right that is held by all is just that, a right. But the government's move is more devious than just attacking the opposition. By creating a third force with the same powers and privileges, this motion creates either a second government group or a second opposition group.
Or both with this guy.
The third group will either support the general policy objectives of the government or it will not. If it supports them, it is with the government. If it opposes them, it is in the opposition.
Correct.
The change in the rules allow the Trudeau government to count on two groups to help it steer the Senate: the GRO and the ISG. Out of the 41 members of the ISG, 38 were appointed by Justin Trudeau, and 3 were appointed by Jean Chrétien. Now, we all know they will continue to support faithfully the Liberals until the end of their mandate, as they have done until now. As Senator Gold once said in an ISG caucus meeting, remember who appointed you. This was Senator Gold in an ISG caucus meeting, group meeting. Until the next election, Senator Germain will be the de facto second leader of the government without having the obligation to answer at QP. Surprising how we know things that you said that weren't supposed to be public. And my gut tells me that a vast majority of the Trudeau-appointed senators will remember who appointed them long after he resigns or is kicked out by Canadians. They will defend his legacy against the changes that Pierre Poilievre will bring. We will see the comeback of the Liberal caucus in the Senate, which will be the official opposition. They may even be invited to join the National Liberal Caucus, which no doubt will be a very low number by then.
They might need all the senators.
I think they could kick the other guys out. And I am certain that the ISG will remain standing, maybe under a new name. Who knows? Names change here. They will not support Pierre Poilievre's policies. They will be a second opposition in the Senate of Canada. The changes to the rules that Motion 165 will bring are giving them the tools to do that. And this second opposition will be able to maneuver without any practical political restraint. The new Liberal leader will not have to answer for their behavior. No Liberal MP will pay a political price if they stall or defeat a bill. They will be able to take unpopular stances, defend Trudeau's ideas, even against the new Liberal leader, and will not be accountable to anyone. This group will stay in ambush in the Senate, ready to move against Pierre Poilievre's legislative agenda. Colleagues, I am sure most of you think I am exaggerating. Well, let me be frank. I hope I am. I hope I am wrong. And I hope that after the election, you will accept the will of the Canadian people and will not stall any bill that is sent over here by the elected House, the Conservative Party of Canada. But I fear that history will repeat itself and that the Justin Trudeau-appointed senators will act just like the Pierre Elliott-appointed senators acted in 1984 and 1991, and will put as many roadblocks on Pierre Poilievre's path as their predecessors did for Brian Mulroney. Now, let me go through the details of the motion and what those changes mean for the Senate. As I said earlier, by circumventing the regular process of having the new rules studied one by one at committee, Senator Gold is robbing us of the chance to measure carefully the impact of the changes. This is sad because there will be unintended consequences to having these new rules. Those of you who will still be in this place in 3 or 5 years will realize that you were duped. First, Senator Gold has decided to reduce the evening suspension by 1 hour and to have it from 7 to 8 p.m. Why he chose this instead of 6 to 7 or 6:30 to 7:30, we will never know. He's decided to skip the regular process. As senators would know, the evening suspension is very often used for those of us who are organized caucuses, used for caucus meetings to discuss strategy for the evening. In fact, Senator Gold circulated in March a rationale on changes of rules that allowed whips to ask for an extension of the evening suspension to allow for caucus meetings. This is not in the motion. Why? We don't know. Maybe the government does not want senators to be able to discuss how they can oppose legislation. It makes their job easier.
Obviously, they don't want it.
Also, the evening suspension is a good time for senators to meet with stakeholders. I have stakeholders asking me many times, Senator, what day could we have a meeting? And now I can almost always say, for sure, I can meet you on a Tuesday from 6 to 8, or possibly a Thursday from 6 to 8, because I know that is when that time will be available. It is often their only free time. For those of us who are here working hard, it is the only free time in a day filled with committees and chamber attendance. Maybe the government is happy with the fact that senators will have less time to meet with stakeholders. Again, it will make their job easier.
You can go home early.
I know I am old school on this issue, but for me, the evening suspension is an integral part of the sober second thought aspect of the Senate. All senators are expected to attend all sittings and stay throughout the debates. We don't. Thursday afternoons, Thursday evenings, colleagues, it is shameful when I look at this Senate chamber on a Thursday at 6 o'clock. People flying in all directions for their airplanes that are leaving in half an hour. We were appointed to this chamber to work. We are paid good money by Canadian taxpayers to be here and do our work. I see this as a reason for us to be able to get out of here no later than 7 o'clock in the evening. All senators are expected to attend all sittings and stay throughout all debates. That is why we do not have exceptional circumstances. That is why we do not agree to having committee meetings when the Senate is sitting. And we're being asked constantly, no, that's the time when we're supposed to be in here. To have a break after a long day, allowing senators to prepare for an evening of debates does not seem to be, in my opinion, again, Senator Lankin's words, a waste of time. Maybe the government does not want senators to be prepared. Maybe the government does not have all of those bad intentions, but other than allowing senators to go to bed earlier, what actually will this accomplish? How many times in the last 5 years, colleagues, do you remember that the Senate failed to go through the order paper before midnight because of an evening suspension? Could happen tonight. With this measure, the Senate will not accomplish more. It will sit shorter hours. Reducing the evening suspension to 1 hour does not reduce time wasting, as Senator Lankin said. It just reduces the time spent on Senate business by senators. Let's at least be honest about that, colleagues.
Adjourns quickly.
The second issue the motion seeks to address is the issue of delayed answers and order paper questions. You will note that the Liberals are coming up with these changes after more than 8 years in power. They were content with not answering questions while they were in power. But on the eve of them returning to the opposition benches, they now push for the creation of an obligation for the government to answer questions. There's been no desire to do that till now. I haven't received an answer from Senator Gold in I don't know how long. Guess what? They did not need to change rules to answer questions. All they need to do is have the will to answer questions. The government is giving itself, though, an additional 8 months to answer questions that are already on the order paper. Obviously, Senator Gold thinks that the Trudeau government is a hopeless case as far as transparency is concerned, and that it will be to a Pierre Poilievre government to properly respect the Senate and provide answers in a timely fashion. In Section 5 of this motion, Senator Gold is giving the right to the government to crawl out of the obligation to provide an answer by simply tabling an explanation of why an answer cannot be provided. Why should the Senate allow this? The government does not have the right in the House of Commons to do this. It does not have it in the Access to Information Act. Why should senators be treated differently than members of the House of Commons? Why is it that Justin Trudeau's Senate, in Justin Trudeau's Senate, I can't answer is considered an answer under the new rules? Speaking of being treated differently than the House of Commons, the government has 45 days to answer their questions, but we would have 60 days to answer ours. Why is that? Why is that, Senator Gold?
Second-class citizens.
Our questions are more difficult to answer?
Obviously.
Must be. Are they less important? Senator Gold has tried to explain that it is because the government has to provide delayed answers in the Senate. Well, I have two objections to this. First, the government does not have the obligation to promise delayed answers. It is its choice. So to make this an excuse for a longer delay in answering does not hold water. Secondly, why would having to provide delayed answers justify taking longer to answer a written question? There aren't enough bureaucrats to answer our questions? What have we increased our bureaucracy in the last 8 years?
40% more.
The government figures that it will be flooded with questions? Let's be serious. There is no valid reason for having a longer delay than we have in the House of Commons. Again, when Senator Quinn asked the question, Senator Gold refused to answer. Would you accept an amendment? You'll have your opportunity. It will be there. Also, Senator Gold's motion limits the senators to 4 questions. Why that number? Why not 5 or 6? And finally, on this issue, I have 92 questions on the order paper as of today. Well, I got some answers today, so this is just an hour outdated. But for the sake of simplicity, I have almost 92 questions on the order paper as of today. Some of these questions have been on the docket since November of 2021.
Unbelievable.
Senator Gold's motion has a transitory measure for those questions.
Imagine the answer.
As I said, the government is giving itself an additional 6 months before the 60-day delay starts. I have been waiting 30 months for some answers, and now the government wants an additional 8 months and will probably give me a "we can't answer this" answer. This isn't serious. This is a joke, Senator Gold. This is a joke. Once again, Senator Gold pretends he is doing something, but is in fact doing the opposite. He pretends that his motion would help senators get more timely answers out of their questions. This is not true. The government will have the ability to just provide a non-answer to forego its obligation. The government is giving itself 8 months to answer questions that have already been filed, some of them for more than 30 months. And finally, the motion puts a hard cap on the number of questions a senator can ask. Shameful. This is democracy?
Independent Senate.
Colleagues, this is not the gift to senators that Senator Gold pretends it is. I am certain that in a few years some of you will deeply regret these changes.
They will.
But let's get to another issue. Time limits for speakers. In Section 7 of his motion, Senator Gold is giving the Leader of the ISG unlimited time to speak. Why is that necessary, to give a third leader unlimited time? In the House of Commons, the Leader of the Bloc Québécois, the third party, does not have unlimited time. I suspect this will allow the Leader of the ISG to play this role of substitute Leader of the government, or the opposition, as outlined already. As long as the Liberals are in power, 2 leaders supporting the government will have this privilege. As soon as the Conservatives are in power, 2 leaders opposing the government will have unlimited time to speak. While Senator Gold is explaining that this is done for reasons of fairness, we are not naive, Senator Gold. This change seeks to give Liberals a double-barrel shotgun to shoot at Conservatives, figuratively speaking, of course. That is why this privilege is not extended to other leaders. Senator Gold was happy to note in his speech that, and I quote, "For other leaders and facilitators, speaking time would be extended to 45 minutes." End of quote. The problem is that under Section 6-3(1)(a) of the rules, they already have 45-minute speaking time. So thanks, Senator Gold. He's given it to you twice. On this matter, Senator Gould's motion is only advantaging the leader of the ISG and no one else.
Nice.
No one. PSG, CSG, take note. You're being thrown under the bus along with us. In Section 9 of this motion, Senator Gould is reducing by 1/3 the speaking time of the Leader of the Opposition on its time allocation motion. Time allocation, and he's taking away our right to speak to it. Such a motion is probably the most drastic procedural maneuver the government can make in the Senate. It is, of course, a straitjacket put on the opposition when it is slowing things down during debate on a government matter, which, as I said, is one of the most important privileges of the opposition. Why does the government want to reduce the time given to the opposition in a debate on a motion to shut down debate? Closure is not enough? The opposition has 13 out of 96 senators right now. Why does the government feel it needs to reduce the speaking time of the Leader of the Opposition? Also, Senator Gould's motion is giving 5 leaders 20 minutes each. 4 of those leaders have voted for the last government budget, I remind you. 4 of them have voted for the budget. That leaves only 50 minutes for other senators to speak on time allocation motion compared to 90 minutes now. With 1 senator from each group speaking, that leaves only 1 senator from the opposition. 1 senator from the opposition on a closure motion. This is where equality between all groups does not make any sense, colleagues. When 4 groups support the policy of the government and are willing to support time allocation to shut down debates because they feel it is wasting their precious time, the new rules would give the opposition 1/5 of the speaking time in debate. And let me be clear, colleagues, 4 out of 5 leaders are supporting that Senator Gould time allocates this very motion. This very motion. 2 hours to support the government, 30 minutes to oppose. How is this fair? I remind you, colleagues, in such a scenario, the only thing that the opposition has left is limited time to express its point of view before the government's will is realized. Senator Gould's motion would add insult to injury by reducing the ability of the opposition to speak even more. The next point in Senator Gould's motion is the issue of the duration of bells and the ability to defer votes. Section 13 of the motion replaces the current rule on the length of times by requiring the Speaker to ask the representatives of 5 groups if there is agreement for the duration of the bells. I don't know why the government chose to include 5 groups and not all recognized groups, and why it is necessary to ask 5 different people if they have agreed instead of asking the government whip if there is agreement. I remind you that, in any event, it takes leave of the Senate to accept that agreement. So even under our current rules, a group that has not been consulted or does not agree on the length of the bells can derail any agreement. I don't know what this change to the rules add, other than lengthening the proceedings before the Speaker can ask to call in the senators. The Trudeau government is world-renowned expert in virtue signaling. This is just simply another example of that. It says it is giving new powers to some parliamentary groups when in fact they already have those powers. In his speech, Senator Gould said, and I quote, "The agreement of whips and liaisons of the 3 largest groups, as well as the government and opposition, would be required in order to modify the default time for bells on standing votes. This is currently exclusive to the government and the opposition. A majority is not represented." As I said, this is not true. The de facto agreement of all senators is required to modify the duration of the bells. Senator Brazo or Senator McCallum, who are sitting as unaffiliated senators, have the right to do that. They stand up and not agree, and we have a 1-hour bell. When the Speaker asks if there is an agreement on the bell, such agreement must be accepted by all senators. Then in Section 14 of this motion, Senator Gould gives the right to defer a vote to 5 groups. I don't know why he thinks groups other than the government and the opposition would need this right, other than to add the list of pretend powers to the ISG, CSG, and PSG, that what they will have. And since these changes are supposed to be about time wasters, I am not sure that giving the right to defer votes to more people will save a whole lot of time. Then we have the changes in Section 17 of the motion that gives status of ex officio on committees to 3 additional leaders. Any senator can attend the meetings of committees mentioned in Section 17. The 3 leaders already have that right. So this change is about the right to receive documents and move motions. Wouldn't it be simpler to have a rule allowing leaders to get the documents of the committees? As for the right to move motions, all recognized groups have members on the committee. A leader can be subbed in at any time during a meeting. Is this change in the rules really necessary, or is it just for optics, to make us believe that the government is actually giving powers to third parties? But in fact, this change has very real consequences for the Conservative Party. As I said before, we have here one group that opposes the Liberal government and 4 groups in which a majority voted to support the government in the most important vote on the budget. It is basically 4-1. With this change, a committee of 12 regular members could see its membership grow by 5 ex officios to 17. Right now, the Conservatives have 2 seats in such committees. So to change the rules, we'll add 3 leaders of groups supportive of the government, and we will go from 11 to 3 split to a 14 to 3 split. I understand that the leaders will not vote, but the speaking time, the ability for opposition senators to ask questions, will be reduced. Even more worrisome for the Conservatives, ex officio count for the calculation of quorum. With Senator Gould's new scheme, there could be a committee meeting with only the leader of the government and the leaders of the ISG, CSG, and PSG in attendance, and quorum would be attained. No one from the committee, no one from the opposition, and Senator Gould would have the only vote. The only vote. And this, colleagues, is something that we want to support. This is something that this government has the audacity to put in front of us and think that we won't read this document. Is that the government's idea of a democratic process? Well, that is a new concept. Clause by clause consideration of bills with only the leader of the government voting. Wow.
Nice. That's your role.
I wished I would be here after the next election and be the government leader and go and vote by myself. Man, I would win every vote, at least close. This may not be the intention of the government, but it is one of the consequences. And I'm sorry to hammer this, but skipping the committee process means that we cannot discuss at length how we can give additional powers to the groups other than the government and the opposition, such as receiving documents without opening the door to scenarios where dissenting voices could be excluded from committee proceedings. Committee meetings is the next issue. Section 19 of the motion would allow committees to meet on a Monday. The Senate does not sit. That precedes a Tuesday when the Senate sits. That may include statutory holidays such as Thanksgiving or Victoria Day. Is that an oversight? Or is this what Senator Gould has in mind, the ability for the non-Conservative majority to force a committee on a holiday? Also, the way the motion reads, any committee can sit on a Monday. Shouldn't it be restricted to committees that regularly sit on Mondays and during their regular slots? Otherwise, a chair could call on a Friday for a meeting on the next Monday for senators which would not have planned, forcing them to scramble to get to Ottawa. How is that fair, colleagues? Remember, if you vote for this motion, you could be the one that is going to have to come and try to make arrangements on a Friday when you've planned something over the weekend. You're going to have to be here Monday. Senator Gould's motion is putting in place a mechanism allowing the Trudeau-appointed senators to hold committee meetings without Conservatives present. And this will be the case not only in the year or so that Trudeau will remain in power, but for a long time after the election. In Section 20 of the motion, Senator Gold adds the ISG as a seconder of the motion creating the Standing Committee on Ethics and Conflict of Interest for Senators. In practice, what does this change? It's just a symbolic reduction of the role of the opposition. Finally, in Section 23 of this motion, Senator Gold is changing the definition of the term leader of the government. This is rather interesting. In his April 25, 2023 decision, Speaker Fury said, Senator Gold is the government leader. He is the head of the government party. And that was why he could use time allocation provisions in the rules. So to either his change is purely for optics, a symbolic change that has no effect in reality, since Senator Gold's situation actually falls in the current definition of leader of the government, or there is an actual need to change the definition. And then it is an admission that Speaker Fury's decision was baseless. Every time Senator Gold is trying to defend his idea of a leader who is not part of a group he leads or a representative who does not necessarily support what he represents, it makes me think that deep down he is ashamed of representing this inept government, and I would not blame him for that. He is trying to make us believe that somehow he is some kind of a nonpartisan member of a partisan group, that he is part of a government led by a political party that he or more or less supports. He goes to cabinet meetings but is not involved in their decisions. He is a tourist. Senator Gold would have us believe that he is just a bystander, a witness to the Trudeau car crash, just like the rest of us. I am sorry, but I do not buy that. Speaking of Senator Gold, I want to take this opportunity to correct some of the inaccuracies of his speech. Senator Gold referred several times to the changes of the Parliament of Canada Act that were adopted in 2022 as part of Bill C-19, the 2022 BIA. In his speech, he said, and I quote, "In order to implement those changes, the regulating body has to adopt implementing regulations. In other words, the Senate has to adopt a revised set of rules. Absent that, the amendments to the Parliament of Canada Act would remain a paper tiger and an empty promise." Problem is that this was not what the government has been saying for the last 3 years. Senators, you will remember that the changes included in the 2022 Budget Implementation Act created additional allocations for some of the leadership positions of the ISG, the CSG, and the PSG. The Conservative senators were comfortable with these changes. They reflected the fact that there were 3 organized groups, led by some senators, for whom this represented additional responsibilities. It is fair that they were compensated fairly for this, as the leadership of the parties other than the government and opposition in the House of Commons were compensated. Bill C-19 was the 3rd legislative attempt to make such changes to the Parliament of Canada Act. In this Parliament, after Bill S-2 was killed by the Speaker of the House, and Bill C-7 never went anywhere. Furthermore, the government had tabled this bill, then named S-4, in the previous Parliament. In fact, today marks the 3rd anniversary of the tabling of S-4. So there are 4 different bills tabled by the government to make those changes. They never introduced changes to the rules as a corollary. In fact, never in the debates on those 4 bills will you find a mention of specific changes to the rules. If, as Senator Gold says, those modifications to the Parliament of Canada Act required changes to the rules, why did the government wait 3 years before moving them? Why didn't the government circulate the proposed changes when those bills were debated? Because there was zero relationship between increasing the salaries of some senators and the content of Motion 165. Minister Dominic LeBlanc appeared in May of 2021 in front of our Committee of the Whole as part of the debate on S-4. He never alluded to changes to the rules to give more powers to the ISG or dilute the powers of the opposition. So let me be clear. Senator Gold is incorrect when he says these changes have any relation at all to the Parliament of Canada Act. He made that up. Another inaccuracy contained in Senator Gold's speech on April 18th is this notion that somehow some senators cannot participate fully in debates. He said, and I quote, "The rules as they currently exist have made it increasingly difficult for all senators to participate fully." He said that our system excludes the absolute majority of the senators. I guess deep down he knows that he is going over the top here, as he later corrected himself, acknowledging that all senators are in fact equal, and our rules reflect that. So let me make a couple of points on this. First, it is false that senators cannot participate, that they are somehow excluded. Since 2016, we have always found ways to include all senators. Everyone can sit on committees. Every senator can rise on debate on any matter. All senators can vote the way they wish. Anyone can join a group or not, with the exclusion of the Conservative Senate caucus for Trudeau appointees. That is not because of our rules. This has always been the case, by the way. In the Senate procedure and practice in June 2015 edition, it is said that senators who are not members of the government or opposition parties can participate fully in the work of the Senate and be appointed to committees. That was in June of 2015, before Justin Trudeau was elected Prime Minister, before Senator Harder came here as the first Trudeau appointee. We can see again this Liberal trick of presenting as new something that already exists. Secondly, the fact that your leader has unlimited time to speak or not, that they receive more money or not, that your whip may defer a vote or not, has nothing to do with your ability to participate fully in the Senate business. Motion 165 is about giving powers to leadership of the ISG, CSG, and PSG, not about giving individual senators any more power. So individual senators, remember that you're gaining nothing from this. And it is normal, as they are already equal to other senators, as Senator Gold said himself. So let me be clear again. Senator Gold is incorrect when he says these changes will enable some senators to more fully participate, because all senators can already participate in any event, and the changes have no effect on how an individual senator's ability to participate in Senate work. Senator Gold said in his speech that one of the objectives of this rule is to make the Senate less partisan. As I have explained already, nothing can be further from the truth. Senator Gold is making a partisan move and changing unilaterally the rules, a first in Canadian history, and I am sure he is itching to double down and use time allocation and make sure his will prevails. Hardly the beginning you want in this new, less partisan Senate. And then we will see the mutation of the ISG into a second Liberal caucus in the Senate. As I have said, we will not have less partisan speeches. We will just have twice the same Liberal point of view. When the Pierre Poilievre government will try to move its legislation, these two Liberal caucuses will undoubtedly work in unison against it. That will signal a return to the overly partisan nature of the Senate when the government in place is faced with a determined majority opposition in the Senate, just like in 1986, 1911, and 1984, to name some examples. Nothing in the proposed changes we have in front of us will reduce partisanship then. On the contrary, the new rules will just exacerbate it. So let me be clear again. Senator Gold is incorrect when he says these changes will reduce partisanship in the Senate. Continuing to dissect his April 18th speech, I was surprised to hear Senator Gold pretend that the opposition is a relatively new concept in the Senate. The fact that the Proclamation of Constitution Act 1867 contained the names of Conservatives and Liberals to be appointed as senators is the proof that there was never any intention to have a nonpartisan Senate. Queen Victoria could have appointed men unaffiliated to political parties, or at least do just like Justin Trudeau and pretend to do so. She did the contrary. The Liberals sat in opposition for the first two terms. When Alexander Mackenzie and the Liberals came to power in 1874, Liberal senators became part of the government. And I want to reassure Senator Gold, the position of the Leader of the Opposition in the Senate dates back to 1867. Luc Letellier de Saint-Just, a good Liberal, was the first to hold this position.
Appointed by a Prime Minister who's Conservative.
The job I hold has been in existence for as long as the job that Senator Gold holds. So let me be clear, Senator Gold, again, is incorrect when he says that the opposition in the Senate is a new concept, and his attacks against the opposition are just a return to the roots of the Senate. Speaking of the first leader of the opposition who became leader of the government in the Senate a few years later, he was known to have a sharp tongue. I don't think Senator Gold was correct when he said in his speech that the Senate was not created with the intention that it should simply replicate the highly partisan talking points in the other place, although Hansard was then written in a very sanitized manner. My team showed me an excerpt of one of St. Just's interventions where he said about one of his colleagues that he has neither energy nor ability, that he ruined the Grand Trunk Railway, and that he is like Satan, and he is guilty of splendid egotism. That was in one speech. Today, Conservatives were asked to leave the House of Commons because they called Prime Minister what Prime Minister really is, a racist. That was in one speech. The myth about the early Senate full of gentlemen debating courteously above partisanship is just that, a myth. And I know you've been waiting for these words. In conclusion, one thing that has changed in the Senate under Justin Trudeau, though, is the idea that the rules have to be changed by consensus. The government has been clear. This package will not be amended. Debate has to be limited. If you listen to the Trudeau government and their supporters in the Senate, nothing is more urgent than changing the rules of the Senate. Canadians are waiting with bated breath, hoping that we change the rules. I bet you, I could well have 700,000 views on this because people are waiting for this. If you listen to the Trudeau government and their supporters, nothing is more urgent. Trudeau, Canadians waiting with bated breath to see if Senator Gold will be able to give Justin Trudeau his departing gift of the Senate controlled by his senators. People waiting for hours in emergency wards across the nation are on the edge of their seat. Will Senator St. Germain have more than 45 minutes to speak? It's an important issue for people across the country. People in the lineup at the food bank are asking themselves, will the PSG and the CSG have the right to defer a vote? People filling out their tax forms today are saying to themselves, I am so happy to pay all that income tax. We will soon have a Senate where more senators will have time to praise Justin Trudeau. On the second day of debate, before a second senator had a chance to speak, the government is threatening time allocation. Instead of us allowing to present amendments, Senator Gold will use the hammer and close debate. He has made his bed. He will ram this motion through no matter what. On the very second day of debate, the only good news is, as I said, this is hopefully the last attack the Trudeau government will make on the Senate. Canadians are waiting for this. In those same emergency wards, in those same food lineups, in those same houses where people are doing their tax returns today, they are waiting for this. That Canadians will soon give a massive, massive mandate to Pierre Poilievre and the common sense Conservatives, who will then be able to appoint senators with a mandate to repair this broken, fractured Senate. They will have a daunting task in front of them. But I am confident, and those that will still be here, and those of you that will still be here, that you will see the light, and you will decide that we need a more efficient, independent, and accountable Senate. a more efficient, a more independent, and a more accountable Senate, working for all Canadians. Thank you, colleagues.